A gifted clergy friend of mine, some of you know and have met Eric Anderson, who came and played here, played the guitar and sang. He used to live in Connecticut, and he likes to tell the story about a local man who's out in his backyard putting up a new bird feeder. And he wants it for the hungry birds to feed. Now, he's determined to find some kind of barrier to keep out the local squirrel population from eating the seeds. And at first he strings a chain from one tree to another. And then he takes a liter soda bottle, some of you have done this, and drilled a hole on one end so he could thread it onto the chain. And so when the squirrel steps on it, it spins. So he puts that on. And then he puts the feeder on. And then he takes another liter soda bottle and he threads it onto the chain and then ties it to the tree. And then he takes Vaseline and lubes up both of the soda bottles and the chain so they're as slippery as heck. That'll fix those squirrels, he says to himself. And when he steps down off the ladder, he turns around, and standing there is one of his neighbor kids, a little girl, who's been watching all this time. And she looked at him and said, "Aren't the squirrels hungry too?" Leave it to the kid to get it right. The squirrels are hungry too. And this little girl saw the strangeness of setting up barriers for creatures that really are just as hungry as the birds. But that's one of the strange quirks about humanity. You know, we're awfully good at setting up barriers against those we decide are undesirable or less than we are, or who we think are a threat. Unlike today's gospel reminds us we need to fear that the world will gobble up our resources. People, and other creatures are not a threat to our own existence. God already has us in God's sight. And if God can care about the smallest sparrow, of how much more value are we to God's plan? After a lifetime of living with animals and watching animals, I have to say that we humans could learn a lot from them. Animals, and I mean everything from house pets to wild things of the land and the sea. All of them have a wideness to their mercy toward one another, and also, for some strange reason, to us crafty humans. And you've seen this before too. I've seen creatures feed other creatures who aren't even in their species. I've seen ducks, a duck standing in a pond, and that duck has enough food, will bend over and give the food to fish. And likewise, I'm sure you've seen, how many times have you seen a mother cat or mother dog who will take an orphan kitten or puppy and nurse it as if it was her own? The point is, there's enough for all. Reverend Jill Kirchner-Rose compiled some lessons that she called God's Zoo that I want to share with you. And we do pretty well to incorporate some of these into our daily life. First, she says, first of all, animal friends teach us to trust in the goodness of our Creator and to live in the present. Living in the present is a problem for all of us. Animals know how to savor the moment. You could tell from Spirit up here and her cookie. That was a key moment for her. They're not consumed with thoughts of the past or they worry about the future. Now is the only moment we have and they have. And right now I'm surrounded by God's creation. We all are. We look out the windows. This is what Francis of Assisi, whose feast day is tomorrow, understood so well. When he preached to birds, fish, wolves, he would say, brother dog, sister cat, brother tree, sister rock, I'm immensely grateful to be here with you right now. So in addition when we think about pets, pets don't put conditions on their love. They have the ability to love without reserve, regardless of our political party, race, gender identity, religion, sexual orientation, age, disability. Jesus very likewise says, love one another as I have loved you. Love one another as I have loved you. Our pets are tangible models of what it means to love without restriction. Even cats, by the way. Another thing that I want to emphasize is that animals have far more intelligence and feelings than we often give them credit for. God's zoo mentions that animals know when they are hurting, that it's important for them and us to go lick our wounds. This is part of the healing bond that animals and wild things understand. You know, elephants, it points out, it's important to grieve when one of their member of their herd dies. They weep. Elephants weep and grieve. Now, we all need companionship of one form or another. And I can tell you an amazing story that happened to my mother and I when I was a kid, when I was about 11 or 12. Our next door neighbor was a very renowned bacteriologist, Dr. Orrin Chapman, or he was known as Chappie. And when he went into retirement, Chappie never did anything halfway. He did it all. Like when he was into golf, he had every club. And then he took up gardening, and so he took that up whole hog. He built a greenhouse next to our house and his property, and he especially favored African violets. Chappie spent a lot of time making cuttings and propagating the African violets by putting them into water until they rooted. And he had 2 5-year-old cats. One was a fluffy gray and white cat named Ruffles, and the other was a short-haired tiger named Juniper. Ruffles and Juniper went everywhere together. They were inseparable. But one morning, very unexpectedly, Ruffles didn't wake up. Juniper was inconsolable. He refused to eat. He hid away from everyone. And then about a month later, Juniper started following Chappie everywhere, and including into the greenhouse. And he would watch Chappie sniff the African violet leaves and then take them downstairs to float them in water. So one morning, our doorbell rings. It's Chappie, looking rather shocked. So he said to my mother and me, "You both have to come with me so that people won't think I'm nuts." So he took us over to his basement, and there was a big tin wash bucket there, a tub full of water. And there were many African violet leaves on top of the water. But then Chappie had brought those cuttings down that morning to get the rooting process started, and by floating them, accompanied by Juniper the cat. Chappie then said back, "But look at these over here, floating in the water." And he pointed to these other bigger leaves that were floating there. They were maple leaves. And they were maple leaves that Juniper had brought in through the cat door and brought downstairs. Chappie said, "Look closely. These leaves all have the marks of little cat teeth on the edge of the leaves." Juniper wanted to copy what I was doing with the violets, and went out the cat door and brought these in and placed them in the water. Another lesson from God's zoo: we all need companionship, especially after a loss. And it's okay to reach out and bond with others who love you when you trust them. And animals really are indeed a gift from God. I feel this very strongly. Yeah, some of you may have had pets who have died. They've gone onto that rainbow bridge, as we often say, and where we hope one day to meet them again. And we're going to recognize those animals later. But even if you've never had a pet, you can appreciate the wild world around us. It's a gift from God. And we also recognize how any creature can recognize kindness. When I was 12, I used to have a bird feeder out in the backyard. And every day after school, I'd go outside and I'd hand scatter seed because there was a flock of sparrows out there and they wait for me and I'd throw seed their way. And this one day, I noticed a tiny sparrow, the real runt of the pack, being squeezed out by the rest. None of the bigger birds would let him eat. So they shoo him away. So I started throwing seed directly to the little runt. I did this every day, and soon he would fly up to me as soon as I came out the backyard. This small kindness had consequences. He started to look for me before I got home from school, and my mother would report that the little runt would fly up to the kitchen window and hover and look in to see if I was there yet. And I get home and she'd say, "Your pal is here." My special relationship with the runt lasted for weeks. And then one day, as I threw seed to him, he looked at me in a way that I hadn't seen him look at me before, with the recognition of a wild bird's sense that he must be wild. And he flew away, never to return. He was not mine to own. He was free. But the honor of having included a wild thing in my life has stayed with me all these years. Animals, the word itself comes from the root word for anima, soul. Now, there are people who say that animals don't have souls, but I often think there are people who have very little contact with the animal world. The contemporary spiritual teacher, and some of you have read his pieces, Eckhart Tolle, says he believes animals are closer to God than humans are. He says this because he believes animals are closer to the source that is God. They're not caught up, as I said before, in the veil of the mind. Humans are caught up in our minds and our worries and our fears and negative thinking that keeps us from experiencing our connection to the source, our connection to God. Reverend Dr. Salvatore Sapienza, who's pastor at Douglas Church in Michigan, says this, and I liked his thinking. "I guarantee you that your dog or cat is not stressed or worried about what's going on in Washington, D.C., or the stock market. Jesus said in the Gospels, 'Which of you can add a single hour to your life by worrying?' Look at the birds in the air. God meets every one of their needs." So, in essence, that little girl we met when I started this message was right. She saw there was no reason to worry and barricade and feed her just because another creature needed food. And the animals know human kindness and show us their appreciation for those who can see the sacred hand of God, the sacred hand of God in every one of them and in us. So when Francis of Assisi, who preached to all those animals, was dying in the monastery in Assisi where the group of men who are now monks followed him, a huge flock of larks started to fly around and around and around the chapel tower at night, where he lay very nearby. And for around and around for hours, singing a beautiful song, singing for Francis. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow captured this passing of Francis in his poem, The Sermon to the Birds, which I'll give you a little bit of. "Up soared the lark into the air, a shaft of song, a winged prayer, as if a soul released from pain were flying back to heaven again. With flutter of wings and songs, together rose the feathered throngs, and singing scattered far apart. Deep peace was in St. Francis' heart. So, perhaps in the spirit of what we can learn from God's zoo, perhaps we see how humans too are not to be singled out for exclusion. Perhaps the answer to the squirrels in our lives is not a barricade of separation, but acknowledgement of their worth and a squirrel feeder of their own, where we share the abundance of what God offers to us all. Amen.
Creative God, you spread the earth with life in many forms. The deer and elk and columbine, the bee and humming swarms. For God was for each flower and bird, the managed by our hand. Teach us to treat with loving care the creatures of the land. The planet teemed with living things before all human birth, and even fire and beasts of prey breed all the life on earth. For God and the last to come, with plants and sea and air. Teach us to tend life's fragile web with wise and tender care.
I invite you, as you go forth today, to be like a dog. A dog is someone who loves you more than he could ever love himself. Jesus is asking us, all of us, to love one another more than we love ourselves. But we have to start with ourselves. You have to realize and believe that God loves you and finds enough things about you that are wonderful, that God is proud of how you turned out, even with the bumps and warts along the way. So may God bless you all this week. May God give you the strength you need. May you be able to look to the skies, and when you see a bird, remember, you're like one of those. You are free to bring God's message wherever you go. God bless you all. Amen.